Hey guys, it's Andrew from Collective Intelligence, and it can be difficult to nail your mixes and get your tracks sounding really professional. So we're going to jump into Ableton. It's not specific to Ableton what I'm talking about, so you can use any software. So this is not a DAW specific video, but we're going to talk about how you can get your track sounding professional, even if you don't have a really good sound system to listen to it on. So let's jump over and we'll start talking about it. So these tips that I'm going to share with you have really helped me understand what other producers are doing and understand how I can improve to sound more professional. And what I am going to suggest right off the bat is that you select a track that you like that is of the highest production quality that you can find, right? So if you're writing some style of dance music, rock music, it doesn't matter. You just need to pick the track that you think is the highest standard for a full mix, a professional sounding mix. So once you've selected that track and you pay the artist for it and you get a high quality WAV file, you can then pull it into Ableton, into one of your projects where you're mixing or producing your track. And I'm going to show you how you can compare your track to their track and have it actually sound fair. And then you can make changes to your track based upon the guidance of theirs. Now, this can be really helpful if you do not trust your listening environment and you don't trust your headphones. But you do need to kind of train and pay attention to your ear. Now, what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be using metering plugins of various different types. And this is not a substitute for using your ears. So don't treat this video as though I'm telling you to use metering plugins instead of listening. That's not what I'm doing at all. So here we go. And we're going to listen to the beginning of this track. This is just, from the drop, so to speak. So we'll just quickly listen. Right, so we get an idea of the kick and bass in this track. And now I've got let's imagine that I've got a full track, but I've just got a kick sample here that I'm going to use. And I'm basically just going to compare the kicks, and there's the same principles taken down the line. So the kick there versus the kick and the track, right, is a big difference. So kick versus. So yeah, there's a big difference, right? But as a beginner or an intermediate producer, we're sitting there scratching our head and saying like, well, their kick just sounds so much more powerful and better and blah, 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 blah. And yeah, I mean, it does. But the reason for why it does at this point in time is because of volume difference, right? So we need to solve the volume problem before we can solve the problem of why their track just has more sub or has more presence in the high frequencies or whatever else. So we'll go ahead and utilize some free plugins, and the plugins that I'm going to use, you'll find all of their links to download them in the video description. So please just jump down there and grab them. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure the volume of this professional track. And it feels weird to say that my track is professional because I don't feel professional, but I think it sounds at a decent level. Let's say it's at a good enough level for this video here. And I'm using my own music simply because I don't run into copyright problems with others. So yeah, cool. So I'm going ahead and just turn these other plugins off, and we're going to worry about looking at a VU meter. All right, so a VU meter is going to show us volume. But it's going to show us it's slightly different to the meters in Ableton. And when we go ahead and press play, we can see that we're peaking on the VU meter at 14.4. Right, so we'll go ahead and we'll go negative 14.4. And now we'll go play. And we'll play that same section. And I'll just delete the rest of the track because it's not necessary in there. Right, so now we're 0 on the VU meter. So this means that we're going to be at around negative 12 on the fader if we're just looking at normally, right? So VU is just a different way of measuring volume. And this is the way that I measure volume for gain staging. So if I was starting a track from scratch, the first thing I would do is I'd make sure that my kick was 0 VU, right? Reason being is because then I've got 12 decibels of headroom above that. And when all of the other elements stack together, I mix everything against the kick because I think the kick is the center of my mix because I make dance music, electronic dance music. So that's the case. So the kick is the center of the track and the kick is the loudest thing in the track. It's simply you just look at the waveform here anyway, like the kick is the loudest part. The bass is quieter, kick's loudest. So anyway, we are going to use the meter on this channel and we're going to listen to that kick and we're going to see, okay, that's 0 on the VU meter as well. So now we have the ability to fairly compare this particular kick versus our own, or at least more fairly compare. And we can really start hearing, right? And yeah, it's got the bass there. We could take that out. So unfortunately, I don't have the clean kick by itself, so it's never going to be perfect when we're referencing like this, but it's definitely going to get us way closer in the ballpark. So what we can do now is we can start paying attention to different parts, right? So the volume is the same, but how about the frequency distribution? How about the sub of the kick? Because that's going to give it the oomph, the power. How about the click of the kick, which is going to make it cut through the mix, right? What are the variations in the frequency distribution? And the way that we can look at that is that we can then bring up span, right? Voxengo span. This is another free plugin. And I've just put mine on high res mode here, right? Just so I can see it a bit better. And I play the kick, right? And then I could come over here and I could turn span on here. Whoops, that's not span. Where is span? Just grab this one and chuck a copy of it over here. So we've got one that's on the kick sample that I'm using and one that's on the track. And now I'm seeing the two tracks, right? And there's other frequencies, like there's other instruments and stuff playing in the reference track that I'm using. So it will be different, but pretty much anything that's in the sub frequencies is going to be just the kick, right? And I can put my cursor here and I can pay attention to the decibel meter here. And I can say, okay, so it looks like this kick it's in like D or D sharp or something. And the peaking volume level of it is around negative 42 decibels that you can see over there, right? And I can come over here and I can do the same sort of thing, right? I can go back cursor. So I can tell you that the sub content of the kick in my reference track is much lower than the sub content in the track, in the kick sample that I've got. So straight away I could start balancing it out and I could bring down the volume of that to better match the reference, right? If I'm like, I want to be similar to the reference. I think the reference is the perfect kick. Does that exist? The perfect kick. The perfect kick. So I'll make adjustments to my kick and my track because it is imperfect, and I'll use a EQ to just bring down the sub of that, just a gentle amount to match it more appropriately here. And then I might find, okay, well the click on their kick is more apparent, so then I would maybe address this part of the spectrum with the EQ and just boost a little bit so it cuts through the mix a bit more. But obviously at the end of the day, sound design choices that you've made might end up just being inappropriate for using against your reference. Maybe your kick's just trash and maybe you need to start making a kick again and using the reference right from the beginning so that you can change the sound of your kick, because if you're just using a sample, it's very hard to manipulate it. Right, so this is how I reference tracks, and this is how you really start getting an idea of how people more professional than you are getting better quality sounding mixes. So they're the first two steps. I use span and I use a VU meter plugin, and volume is half of the battle, right? Once you've got the volume sorted, it's easy. It's easy, and once you know how to look at what the volume of particular frequencies are in the mix, it's becoming very easy. So if you're thinking like, man, their mix is just way brighter and it's cutting through better, go to span. Look at how high volume their frequency in the look at the volume of their high frequencies versus the volume of your high frequencies. If you need, brighten things up. If you need, bring things down. The EQ can correct a lot when it comes to this. You might be making EQ corrections for a lot of things here. So then finally, what I would attract your attention to as well, just to pay attention to, is also like the stereo field. The stereo field is important to pay attention to, right? And then here in this track, you can see that I've got stereo activity going on, right? There's difference between left and right, and there's, you know, whatever. I open up this one on my other track, you know, the kick track here. Dead in the center, right? No stereo content. So this track, the reference track, is always going to sound larger, right? So pay attention to that. Now, there's other things as well, like the depth of the mix, which is kind of a bit harder to measure. I don't know any ways of sort of measuring that with metering tools. You could try and measure the dynamic range, but I don't know whether that would really give you what you're after. You'll probably have to use your ears for that, for the depth, and that'll come down to the use of spatial effects like reverb. So hopefully there's some interesting tips for you. Use meters. Use that trick that I told you with the VU meter to set your kick at -12 decibels and mix to that. And you know that you're always going to have your mix at a sweet spot. Your volume overall will be plenty of headroom for the mastering engineer to go and do their work. So yeah, hopefully that was helpful for you guys. See you in another video really soon. Peace.